Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning and Happy New Year. Welcome to the Carsey Policy Hour. I'm Melinda Negron Gonzalez, your host. Each month we gather to unpack a pressing policy issue shaping New Hampshire communities. And today we're going to do something a bit different. Instead of drilling down into one specific policy debate, we at Carsey thought it would be a good idea to begin the new year with a discussion that takes a broader bird's eye view of New Hampshire's policy landscape. And we think this wider lens will help us identify patterns as we look to the year ahead to figure out where polarization matters most, where pragmatism still holds, and how national political dynamics intersect with state and local policymaking. But before we dive into today's discussion, let's take care of some housekeeping. The Carsey School of Public Policy is independent and nonpartisan. At the Carsey Policy Hour, our aim is not only to inform, but also to prompt meaningful discussion, and we will do that today. The school's nationally recognized for rigorous and actionable research, and we also educate tomorrow's leaders through our professional master's programs, offered both online and in person. So please do check out our website for more info about our centers and about our programs. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank our series partners for the Carsey Policy Hour. Our partners are the New Hampshire Municipal Association, New Hampshire's Bureau of Education and Training, the New England Sustainability Network, and the New Hampshire Association of Counties. Following the discussion this morning, we'll open the floor for questions and discussion. Feel free to submit comments and questions during our discussion with our three panelists using the chat feature, and you'll find the chat button on the center left of your Teams screen. The chat is open and visible to everyone, so we do ask that comments remain respectful and constructive. And also please identify yourself when you pose a question or offer a remark. Before we dive into today's discussion with our three panelists, I think it's helpful to get on the same page about a couple of terms we'll be using throughout the discussion. These definitions aren't perfect and people debate them, but they give us a common starting point. So today's discussion is about partisanship and polarization in New Hampshire. So what do we mean by partisanship and polarization? Partisanship at its simplest is loyalty to or identification with a political party. Sometimes it's policy-based, supporting a party because you agree with its ideas, and other times it's even deeper than that. It's a little bit more identity-based, where party affiliation really becomes part of how people see themselves. That's kind of the political science definition. Polarization refers to how divided politics has become when people, parties, or institutions sort themselves into opposing camps with less and less overlap. And in political science, which is my background, political scientists tend to talk about two different types of polarization in societies. Ideological polarization is about policy differences, right? How far apart people are on issues. And then there's something called affective polarization, which is more personal. It's the growing dislike or distrust or even hostility that people feel toward those on the other side. And there's been a lot of talk about polarization in American politics in the past few years or decade. Polarization isn't inherently incompatible with democracy, but when it's unmanaged, it can really erode trust and weaken our ability to solve problems. And people are probably nodding their heads. We've seen that in the US. So today's talk is about what we're seeing in New Hampshire communities, what you're seeing play out in your own communities. And so with that framing in mind, we're very pleased to be joined by three panelists who bring their expertise and perspectives on New Hampshire's civic and policy landscape. So I will introduce the three of them, and then they can also, when we dive into the questions, begin by explaining a bit more about their own backgrounds. So our first panelist She is one of New Hampshire's foremost experts on state government and policy. She's also the executive director of Citizens Count, which is a nonprofit dedicated to providing unbiased information about New Hampshire democracy and politics and policy. She's also a board member of New Hampshire Civics and an advisory board member for New Hampshire Together. She's a member of the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits Policy Committee, and she is the director of the Rudman Center at UNH's Law School. Our second panelist is Steve Brown. He's an educator, facilitator, and futurist who helps organizations and communities navigate the turbulence of our rapidly changing world. With New Hampshire Together and its partners, he's developing deliberative processes intended to help New Hampshire residents solve problems across their political and social differences. And finally, last but not least, we have our very own Michelle Holt-Shannon. She's the director and co-founder of New Hampshire Listens at the UNH Carsey School of Public Policy. For over 30 years, her work on and off campus has focused on community problem solving and increasing engagement in the decisions that impact people's lives and bringing people together for navigating controversy and conflict. So those are our three esteemed panelists. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your perspectives. So I thought I would begin with a big picture question about civic health in New Hampshire. When you think about civic health in New Hampshire right now, what gives you the most reason for optimism as we enter the 2026 policy cycle? Let's start with a positive note, and let's start with Anna and then go on to Steve and then go on to Michelle.
Sure. So I have actually been very encouraged by the cell phone ban that was passed as part of last year's state budget. And that may seem like kind of a trivial thing. And you may think, okay, yeah, there was bipartisan support, but I see this as the first step to a larger acknowledgement in our society of the harms that are coming from social media and these digital divides and so on. So, when I think back to the changing legal and legal landscape around cigarettes and the conversation around that, it really started focusing on the harms towards children. And granted, in schools, it's also about, attention spans and so on. But when there was just such broad bipartisan support for that, I thought this is a little seed, I think, of a larger conversation and acknowledgement that we've done harm to our society and we need to do repair.
I'll also think about young people a little bit. In 2024, there was a UNH poll that revealed that I think 75% of young people in the state are open to and willing to participate in cross-political divides, and they're hungry for it. So that is really encouraging to me. And over the last year, I've been talking with a variety of educators and students around the state. The Hype conference out of Sauhegan High School, that's a program that has high school students organizing conversations around really hard topics. They ran an intergenerational conversation about the future of New Hampshire this last fall at St. Anselm's, and they're organizing a conference at UNH this spring for high school students from around the state around what moral leadership looks like and should be. And so those types of activities, and there's also another project called the Can We Project that's coming to New Hampshire, which is about helping young people learn the skills to have conversations across differences and then understand how they can make a difference in their community. So all of those, so I really feel like there's a lot of positive energy and a lot of opportunity and interest in our younger people in having better conversations.
That's great, both of you, Anna and Steve. I think I agree, and I think one of the things that sort of is a broad statement for me is that being free, being diverse, and self-governing is this like tricky, magical aspiration that is worth pursuing. And the thing that I see every day in my world is that we can talk about hard things. So even though the message of our polarization, it's real, it's also amplified and it's worse online. So if that's mostly what you're seeing kind of our worst selves. And so you'll hear me repeat over and over again, probably today, is just get involved locally, and it will help shift your perspective a little bit, and there'll be, kind of hopeful ways to dig in. I think for me, if I had to pick one, the first thing that came to mind about what concerns me actually is misinformation and disinformation, and it's coming from so many sources, and we all fall for it. I've fallen for it. Like, we all have to do a lot of extra sorting, and I think one of the reasons it's problematic, besides a ton of reasons, is that we have to be informed. We have to be able to have information sources that we trust in order to be engaged and participate in our communities. And when we can't do that, or we feel thwarted for that, or our mistrust is amplified, that it's really hard to maintain the kind of governance that we're hoping to have and have been trying to have in America. So.
Yes, indeed. So picking up on that, in terms of polarization in New Hampshire and beyond, it's not just about policy disagreements, right? It's also about how people feel about those on the other side. So for the three of you, when you're doing what you do in New Hampshire politics and policy, do you think the bigger challenge is the divisions around policy, or do you see a growing mistrust and hostility more generally in New Hampshire politics? And how does that shape what's actually possible in terms of governance in the state, but also in your more local communities? And we'll start with Anna again and go around.
Sure, that's great, because I wanted to jump in first, but I was like, oh, I went first last time. Okay. I have so many thoughts about this, so I will try to stay concise. And the first thing I will say is I will harken back to what you said in your introduction about effective polarization versus being actually far apart on the issues. And I think it's really important to remember that, because at the state level, I have been measuring partisanship as part of my work with Citizens Count for many years now, using party unity score for my political science nerds out there. And yes, it is at an all-time high. But I think that really disguises the fact that in New Hampshire, there is still a huge, huge amount of legislation that is not polarized, that is not hyper-partisan. And there are a lot of moments of agreement, for example, on housing, which was very much a cross-partisan issue, both for and against. It really crossed party lines. So I think that when I think about what this looks like in New Hampshire, I think it's very different than the national level. And I would say whereas we have these measures of high partisanship, I think that is about sort of national priorities and party behavior trickling down, and is not necessarily reflective of most legislators or most members of the public. And I go back to, what Michelle was just saying about the importance of going out and having conversation with people in the public, because I do think that this is coming mostly from party leadership and this sort of, national narrative, as opposed to what actually happens on the ground in New Hampshire. Not in all cases, and we're trending in the wrong direction that way. But I still see the majority of it actually being very productive in New Hampshire.
I'm relatively new to the state level political scene, so I defer always to Anna about those things. But in the conversations I've been having with state legislators and state officials, I do see that most of them are very open to conversations. You can sit down and talk. There's a reasonableness there. So I do see that, what Anna's saying. I think one of the things that concerns me about this, and I saw that Bruce mentioned in New Hampshire, the Civic Health Report, that the level of polarization, whether it's at the national level or we've seen in school board meetings and a variety of things in the state, is leaving people to feel disconnected from their communities, and they're stepping away from engagement in different ways. So the striking statistic for me was that in 2019, 76% of New Hampshire residents felt that they mattered to their community, and that's now down to 43%. And that is a remarkable decline. And I know that COVID probably had some part to play of it, but I think that also the polarization. So I think the the question, yes, there are political activists who are really engaged that are highly polarized, and I think that a lot of people are stepping away, and that's a big concern for me, and just saying, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't feel like these conversations are relevant to me or matter to me, or people are solving problems that are affecting me.
I mean, I definitely, I think maybe most of us would say that the national toxic, polarization is infecting local and state work. Um, in my work, one of the things that I think helps with that, I mean, two things. One is getting involved locally, because trust is such a big thing, and you have to, I think, be able to be in relationship with people to actually have the deepest trust that you can, whether it's that your town is going to replace lead pipes, or that your legislators are really aren't in the pocket of some big corporation. So it's there's lots of things to pay attention to. I think it is, there's a lot of research around the more polarized we are, the higher the likelihood that we will elect, I'll put it a couple of different ways, really hardcore advocates and fighters, for a particular thing, or people more on the extremes, or, sort of a mix of a little less ready to compromise. And so if there's more of those folks in the whole body, that also then kind of starts the vicious cycle of, we're not able to talk to each other or get anything done. And so I do think it really matters that I was just in a conversation on Monday with school board members and state legislators, and they were naming some complex but subtle places where they have wanted to dig in. We talked a lot about education funding. And so they were saying, here's a few places where we really have to kind of get around the table and dig into this issue or that issue. And they said, but it's almost impossible to do it. And, so for me there, besides being in that body and trying to make something, positive happen, I think for us, we have to, as citizens, remember that not only voting, but we have to put our voice in. We have to ask, and remind and demand and seek change that we think will be good for our communities. So, yeah, I'm seeing the comment on the school funding and polarization. Bruce, I don't know, how long we've been talking about unfair education funding in New Hampshire. 30 years, longer, too long. Right. I mean, that was one thing that kind of gave me hope in that conversation on Monday. Some of the conversations that we need to have, and I'll give you an example. One was about special education, and it was not about not funding special education. It was not about not making sure that students with disabilities have what they need. It was about the problem with the funding. And that's a broad conversation in general about education funding, but there's a specific one around special education to be had as a part of that larger conversation. And all that to say is, I think in a really polarized environment, some people would be like, I don't want to have that conversation because I don't want you to underfund or fund even less special education. It's sort of I don't want to talk about it in case it gets worse. And so we have to kind of find a way to push through that, I think.
Indeed. Thank you. And thanks, Bruce, for the question. I want to go back to the issue of participation and who participates. And thank you, Bruce, for the comment about New Hampshire's Civic Health Index, which shows that relatively high levels of engagement are the norm across New Hampshire. But we know that participation isn't evenly distributed. So I wonder if you all could talk a little bit more about who participates, who you see participating in local communities, also at the state level, because I think who participates also matters. Sometimes it feeds polarization, or it could do the opposite. But so I wonder who you see participating. Yeah, was it youth in this community, seniors in that community, or do you see any patterns throughout the state?
I'm okay
Starting
to
with
jump.
Anna.
Yeah, I'll jump in again first. Why not? The area that I am most familiar with is the state level and the state legislature, and it is very well known that we skew older, not only as a state, but that is accelerated then in our state legislature. And there's a lot of reasons for that. They get paid $200 a session plus mileage. So that pretty much means it's a great position for someone who doesn't have to work because they're retired, or if they're independently wealthy or they've reached that higher level where they can have a lot of flexibility. So definitely there's an underrepresentation of younger people, people who have 9-to-5 jobs. You will get some, firefighters or maybe stay-at-home mom who have kids in school, but overall, it's definitely skews older. And I will say, it's just to sort of play devil's advocate on some of what Steve said. It is true that I'm concerned that some of the younger people are not participating actually because of more disillusionment. And I know that there was a poll that came out last year, and it was the Harvard Kennedy School that showed, there's an uncomfortable level of openness to violence among young people, saying that, if peaceful protest fails or if your leaders are doing actions that you view as, illegal or unconstitutional, that violence is acceptable. And so I am also concerned that younger people, yes, we have these barriers to the state legislature. We can talk about the pros and cons of a volunteer legislature. I could do that all day, but maybe young people are also not participating because there's sort of complete frustration with our system overall. And that is very concerning to me, especially if they are then thinking about violence.
The thing that we do make up stories about each other. We have caricatures of each other. I mean, if you ask me, even my brothers and sisters, I'm from a very mixed politics family, and if you ask me what my sister believes about something, I will probably be wrong when I tell you what I think she believes, and I will describe it even in a more heightened way than maybe she would. And so I think of the work that I do actually as violence prevention. At its most kind of low bar. And then, higher, hopefully lots of other things, problem solving, engagement, hope for a better community and a better life for people. But there is something about being able to engage people, even people who, have horrific views compared, in your view, that interaction still can matter in terms of humanizing and at least having a backstop to violence as a solution. So that is real, and it's a part of what I'm seeing. In terms of who's participating, I guess I have two things to say. For me, I've been in New Hampshire for 30 years, and when I think about what some of the tables that I've been around have started to look like, they are getting more diverse in a number of ways, but they're getting more diverse, and I think that there's things that groups in New Hampshire have done, Endowment for Health. There's a lot of I think hopeful history, in my experience in the last 10 years about some of the work that's been done. The marginalization that I worry about probably the most is about this combination of income and educational attainment and access. And by that, I don't mean everybody's got to get their PhD or go to college. What I mean is that anyone, regardless of their income or education, should feel like they can walk into a public meeting and comment, that they can participate. And when they do, I think they'll hopefully participate more. But there's also situations where we've seen, people of all kinds of identities not feel welcome, or worse, feel locked out of participation. But that's the group I worry about. And yet, as New Hampshire has become more diverse in a few particular different ways, that's also hopeful to me about New Hampshire, because it's small enough that you can notice increased participation, I guess I'll say.
Just a quick plug for Citizens Count. I'm just going to say we have an advocacy toolkit to hopefully have some easy tutorials, how to go to a public hearing, how to contact an elected official. We don't have them for the local level. Someone needs to step up on this call and create like an advocacy toolkit for the town and city level.
I have noticed Devin has asked a monster of a question in the chat. And I'm going to give a very incomplete and insufficient. I'll try to give an answer, some sort of answer, at least to get the conversation going about it. And I'm going to start in a place.
Can you read the question before you answer it?
Yes, well, it's a long one, but New Hampshire is not the only state struggling to address school funding. What might information and engagement about the role of education, especially public schools, in our communities look like, especially in such a decentralized state with a cultural history of low tax and investment, government distrust? How might we build from the hyper-local seeds of engagement up to larger scale cultural change, from hyper-partisanship to state-level policy change? So that's a big one. And I think there's a variety of answers. I'm going to start perhaps with some other statistics. There was a New York Times Siena poll in October that revealed that about 2/3 of Americans think that we're too partisan to solve any problems. Like we have gone down, we're too far down the rabbit holes to actually come together and solve problems, which is an incredibly disheartening state, right? But there is also recent research, and it's from a University of Maryland. It could have been the University of Maryland, could have been Johns Hopkins. I don't remember right now. But they took 150 policy issues, polled lots of people, and found that in about 70% of them, there was significant agreement on the solutions. So we're in this very strange state where we don't believe we can solve problems together, but we actually agree on a lot of things. So the challenge becomes, well, how do we find those common grounds? How do we get past the stereotypes and the stories we tell about each other that Michelle was mentioning, to a space where we can see where we share values, share where we share agreements, and then have those conversations about how to move forward. And so one of the processes is there's a technology which is very old called civic assemblies, which is a very highly designed space to invite a representative group of the community from across the community, whether it's a town or the state, to have a conversation about an issue, to learn how to listen to each other, to learn how to deliberate, to learn from experts and each other about the actual state of what is, where are we now, and what are the possible solutions for moving forward, and to reach some agreement. And we did that as New Hampshire Together as a pilot in 2024. And we worked on political polarization and had a very representative group of Granite Staters, and 85% of people agreed on 4 different solutions. So there was tremendous agreement at the end of the day. And those types of processes, whether it's a civic assembly or other types of deliberative processes, can start to build those things. And they start to engage people who participate that have more faith in government. They understand how government works. They understand better how they can participate. So I would advocate for that's one possible solution. The other thing that I think we lack is a shared positive story about the future we want to create and the New Hampshire we want to leave to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And we are really not very good at having those types of conversations and then taking action on them. So I think, again, creating those spaces where people can come together. And the other thing I would add, and I think this might sound not off topic, but not just participating in local government, but participating in, whether it's Red's food truck and going to volunteer there, or doing the town cleanup in Dover. There's a variety of ways to participate in your community that are not political, but they do build bridges and they do build trust and they do make a difference that's very tangible. And once you start to do that, I think that also starts to see these conversations. So.
That's great. Thank you. And I see there are also comments in the chat about, examples where people are engaging in discussions, and David mentions the Ethics Project in Peterborough, led by Eric Bowman, and so on. So going back to something that Anna said about participation and the lack of or the trend that, at the state level, there's a more senior community. How could youth be more engaged at the state level?
I'm going to go first again. Sorry, Steve and Michelle, but I'm just so excited to jump in, because what I had an opportunity to present to leadership Greater Manchester this fall. And it was my first time doing like a really youth-oriented presentation. And as I was going through, I realized there are so many examples in New Hampshire of a person who is not yet of voting age going to a local legislator and saying, I have an idea for a bill. And this becomes law, and it's celebrated as like a bipartisan success. Really extremely inspiring. And anytime I've been at a public hearing in the State House and young people have come to testify, I've seen the legislators around the table, who are mostly older, getting so excited that it's a young person in the room telling us what they think, and they'll do, you can't ask questions during a public hearing with that, or rather you have to ask questions, you can't make statements. So the legislators will go around and they will say, would you believe that I think it is just so remarkable that a young person would come to testify? They like have to like phrase their compliments as a question. So I just, when I was doing that youth leadership present, so a couple examples, student on the Seacoast that got a bill requiring free period products in school bathrooms. Representative Cassandra Lebesque, now a state representative, originally started out for a Girl Scout project looking to raise the marriage age in New Hampshire, which was 13 for girls, 14 for boys. And then many other examples just of youth testifying, getting the eating disorder hotline on the back of student IDs. So I like, if there's a young person that I know who starts talking about something, I tell them, you could probably get a bill passed. Like, it's not that high of a barrier in New Hampshire to get a bill sponsored, let alone passed. And so I like big flashing lights. I feel our legislators have an appetite for it.
Seeing in the chat, I posted New Hampshire Civics, which Anna's on the board of, and New Hampshire Possible has some great messages, for all of us. There's a lot of bad things happening, and in the world there always is, but in our country we are really in it's hard to watch. There's a lot of hard things happening, and again, some of us have known that for a very long time. Some of us, it's a new experience. And I think I'm losing my train of thought. I hope I'm going back to your question, Melinda. Participating and the opportunities to participate intergenerationally. When I'm in schools and communities and young people are facilitators, all the adults behave a little better, I have to say. It helps, I think. It helps us just kind of go, oh yeah, like we don't want to be our worst selves when young people are watching. And it's actually a great outcome, in terms of that. And I am so impressed, middle school, I haven't had as much contact with elementary school kids, but middle school for sure, high school, college students, young adults are so impressive. And I know we there's so many like generation stories. These people don't care. These people are on TikTok. Nobody's going to have babies. It's like there's so many, and because the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And but again, if you are showing up in person and engaged with young people, it is inspiring, and it is a chance to encourage them, say you notice, and also listen and learn. My kids have taught me a lot of things, and the youth in New Hampshire have as well.
I just got to throw in, you brought up New Hampshire civics and your comment about when there's a young person in the room, older people behaving better. And it reminded me, I went to the Kid Governor inauguration last year, which is a program run by New Hampshire Civics. New Hampshire Kid Governor, check it out. They have the new inauguration is coming up. And I remember sitting there in that ceremony and there were all these legislative leaders there with a whole room, the State House chamber full with kids, and hearing each of them stand up, both parties. And it was almost felt like like a sort of recommitment to their vows to like towards the Constitution in a way, to democracy. Yeah. And it was really transformational to see how this program for youth and kids I got the sense was really influencing our lawmakers.
I think Michelle and Anna actually I have covered a lot of it, and I opened up with the youth engagement, the work of the Hype conference, and and then I just learned about the revolution and ethics work. One of the things that I have observed is that there's so much good work happening all across the state, and there are so many opportunities to plug in, but sometimes it's also very hard to find it, and it's also hard for some of these things to get connected, right? So the value of an organization like New Hampshire Civics is like, how do we bring some of these things together? But I think, just looking at the richness in the chat of all the different programs, there are opportunities to engage, and we need to, and it's often run by young people, right? The work for Stay Work Play, incredible organization. Their definition of young almost includes me, which is crazy, but they, there's that work, and then there's all this work going on in the schools that we should be supporting. So there's a lot of places there to be hopeful. I think the challenge is, how do we move from the conversation to helping people see impact, right? So Anna's examples of getting a bill passed is really powerful, because suddenly now I feel like, oh, I can have some impact in my community. And what does that look like at the local level? Are there examples where you can see young people making a change at the local level? And maybe that's in the schools, right, where they can, impact school policy around an emerging issue, whether that's how do we deal with AI, right? So I'm in conversations with some school districts about a deliberative process related to AI and learning, because that's a really challenging issue and it's complex, and the whole community needs to be involved, including the students and the parents and teachers. So I think, how do we make it possible to move from just great conversations to actual impact, and that will generate that flywheel and get people more engaged.
Yeah, I want to add on to that too, Steve, and again about the hopefulness. When I was a teenager, I remember watching a documentary about poverty and just being almost inconsolable afterwards, and my mom and dad being like, I guess we can't let you watch stuff like this. They just didn't know how to answer me. Instead of, they were like, okay, sorry, babe, but I and I think that youth view of things that are unfair is really important for us to keep seeing as we get older. I walk my dog almost every day, and I talk out loud sometimes because I just got to get stuff out. And one of the things I was thinking yesterday, I have this imaginary, what could I post on social media that would and government I love is the lead in that I have right now. What's government I love? I love government that removes lead pipes. I love government that ensures workplace safety. I love government that protects clean water. I love government that, and there's a lot of keeps bridges from collapsing. There's lots of things that I think is in that broad swath of stuff that really shouldn't be partisan or isn't partisan that Anna was talking about. Because there really is a campaign against all government, right now. And you have to engage with it to start to be able to sift between the stuff that you want to change, and there's plenty to change, and the stuff that we need to sustain and double down on. So thoughts about that?
I love that. I love that idea. I tell my students all the time, government has a horrible image problem. I mean, on any given day, government is doing all the things to make sure that we breathe clean air and have, safe drinking water and all the other things that we take for granted. So I love that idea, Michelle. So looking to the chat, there's lots of wonderful stuff happening in the chat. Going back to a question that Jonathan Kipp asked. Thanks for the question, Jonathan. I don't know if this question was specifically about youth, but I'm going to broaden it. He's asking about how we can reassure folks that their voice matters, because locally he's observing a combination of apathy, distrust, and a belief that a new voice or a new perspective will not be welcomed or heard by others. Mm-hmm. So how do we reassure folks when they finally take that step to become involved, that their voice matters, especially people from underrepresented or marginalized communities who aren't normally part of the conversation?
I have one quick thing to say, and that is that they don't go in alone. It matters that, when you're a part of a group, or if you just have a friend to go in with, and don't go alone.
I think that's a great piece of very simple, concrete advice. I was thinking to myself about, because I there are many examples that I also like to bring up of where one vote or like one person contacting made a difference in New Hampshire. I love to tell the story about how the death penalty was repealed in New Hampshire because it passed by just one vote. And 34 legislators changed how they voted from when it first came up in the January to when they did the veto override in September. And I can almost guarantee that wasn't, them Googling death penalty pros and cons, right? That was conversations and very complex thinking. But knowing that can happen and having examples of that, that's inspiring. But it is very scary, I think, to walk into something like this and not know if it's welcome or not. And I also think it can, town to town and city to city, I do think that we do need to really step up as community members to make sure other people feel welcome, and that's partly on our local elected officials, but it also makes me think, Steve, something you were talking about and you and I have had a brief conversation of, and I was thinking about the other day, I should have another conversation with Steve about that. But is there a way that we can come up with maybe some model policies that could be adopted at the local level, for example, to incorporate youth voice on school boards, right? Because I think sometimes there's sort of like this performative inclusion where it's like, okay, everybody can step up to the microphone and make a comment, or this student school board member gets to say something. But then if it's not incorporated or really received, so I think that there's sort of this soft aspect to that, whether it is a model policy that, Steve and I are talking about, or more just about sort of that culture that we build among our community. Because there can be just, I can provide examples of where absolutely one voice makes a difference, but I would just really love, Michelle, I'm going to steal that about bringing a friend, because it is a very concrete, simple thing you can do that hopefully makes a difference.
Great. And now just to add, the School Boards Association is bringing youth school board members together, which is kind of cool.
Okay, looking at the chat, Devin is asking a really big question. Thanks for the question. Going back to information, disinformation, can you talk more about finding news about local issues? New Profit is an example of an organization trying new approaches with technology to build relational information and sharing ecosystems. Right now, it seems local journalism is dying, so fractured partisan news, news in quotation marks, is filling the gap, says Devin. So could you talk about finding news about local issues?
Can I jump in, Anna? Is that allowed?
Of course. No, I would love, I feel like I've been hogging this.
I want to combine it. There was also another question about a parent, I think, asked about her daughter, said, where can I find unbiased news? I'm going to try to combine the two. So I think the local news, the Granite State News Collaborative, is a really great organization, and they are local news outlets that are combining resources and collaborating to share new local stories from around the state. So I would head there as a place to start, and a place to be supportive of local news as well. So and that includes everything from Laconia Daily Sun to the Seacoast. What I can't Seacoast on local. I can't even remember right now what our Seacoast paper is. I am on the West Coast, and it's very early, and so so that would be a place to start. The other thing. Around unbiased news, I think the bigger challenge is around understanding the biases of the different sources you're getting. And there are some really great resources out there, organizations that kind of will rate the bias, right? And say this is left leaning, this is right leaning, this is more in the middle. There's that type of thing, and so there's those types of resources out there. I think Ground News is one of those examples, but there's also some great resources and services that provide you with different takes on the same news story. So you'll say, this is what the Wall Street Journal is saying, and this is what Fox News is saying, and this is what NPR is saying, and this is what Politico is saying. So you can get a variety of perspectives. And then your job as the consumer is to be thinking about, well, how do I understand the motivations and the things behind those biases and come to some sort of conclusion on my own. And I think that's a practice. We're seeing more and more of that practice in schools as they kind of reinvent what media literacy is and digital literacy means. But there are lots of wonderful resources out there, which I don't have at my fingertips to share in the chat, but you can find in a variety of ways. And maybe the folks at Carsey can share some of it later on.
I think All Sides, is it allsides.com or allsides.org, that it'll show you like every national news organization rated, but that doesn't touch local news, but it's a really easy to view one.
I'll just say, I think that when you're thinking about getting involved, ask yourself, like, what do you love? Like, what do you care about? You love, ultimate frisbee? Great. Get involved with your, local recreation department. And even if that feels like all about play and not about politics, you'll start to see the politics and decisions that get made, about anything. And so, and also you can, ask yourself, what are you worried about? Get involved in that. And I think those are good guides, because I think sometimes we think about like, well, getting involved and caring about this stuff is so overwhelming. I can't do everything, so I'll do nothing, or it all feels terrible, so I'll just back away. And if you lead with something you love or something you're worried about, you might find a way to engage in a place that feels more like it feeds your soul and it's more hopeful, even if what you're committed to, there's some great work in Durham, Freedom Cafe on trafficking, human trafficking. When I think about human trafficking, it's so heartbreaking. It's like horrible stuff going on. But they have a group of people that actually have built a lovely community to be able to impact that really sad situation. So it's it's kind of back to don't go alone, but finding a group that gets at things that you care about.
That's great. Thank you. And so many others of you out there have added in ideas and organizations and news sites. So thank you for all of those. Pat, or Pate, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, asked a question about how do we somehow reimagine a long-time structure like community service block grant or community action agencies in order to refresh and move toward cross-section connectedness and transformation and growth locally and statewide?
The thing that I am seeing, and maybe not so much about that particular piece, but housing, early care and education, all kinds of environmental things. If you pick a topic in New Hampshire, there's probably a group of people, a nonprofit, very focused on that thing. Again, lead poisoning, like there's, pick almost anything. And so from there, I think, and some of those people have been meeting, the second Tuesday of the month for 15 years, and they are just kind of trying to like plug along at that thing. And at some point, some things start to tip, and they can look back on the progress that they've made and the changes that they're making. And so, I would dig in and see like who are the main people. Is it regional planning commissions? Is it the community action programs? And a lot of times they will start to build coalitions and struggle to get people to be a part of them. Because it's just hard to get through the noise. It's hard to say, if you care about mental health, show up at this meeting. There's mental health coalitions all over the state, that are very local. So I do think that, yes, sometimes it's like this very boring trudge, to get to change. But sometimes change just feels like it suddenly happens, but people have been working on it.
And I will just throw out there, I had seen that question that you highlighted, Melinda, and I was quietly filing it away because I was like, I need to think and read about that. But I will add just larger context, since I think that we probably have a lot of people in this room who are thinking at a slightly higher level potentially. And one thing that I'm thinking about that is very related is that New Hampshire has a long tradition of relying on nonprofits to provide services that are really, in most other states, run and provided for by the government. And so when I'm thinking about, community action partnership and block grants and so on, I'm thinking, how does that look like in New Hampshire, in particular, the relationship between nonprofits and the government? Because that is one thread that I think there is some growing hostility towards nonprofits, the same way there is growing hostility towards government at this point. And so I think, without diving down a whole other road that we could do a whole other Carsey policy hour on, I think that that's worth considering. What are the similarities and differences between nonprofits and government? Because I think that they both require community involvement and community buy-in. And there's a really unique partnership in New Hampshire between those two that I think is so much stronger than it is in other states. So that's part of our unique civic culture in this state.
And I would add just one thing, and to build off, Michelle mentioned the regional planning commissions, and I think they are an underutilized and underappreciated resource for both doing service work for communities in their regions, but also as a convener across the region to try to bring together to solve problems and think about how we can collaborate. I'm privileged to serve on the Stratford Regional Planning Commission, and I'm just so impressed by the quality of the staff there, but also the engagement that they're able to create across the region. So I just a plug for them. And unfortunately, they lost funding last year from the state, but that's reach out to those folks. They can help.
So in the time we have left, this has all been great and very positive. One negative note then from a comment made by Dennis about 3 death penalty House bills are up for action. And it seems like this is an area where there's some real division. So I wonder if we could just talk a little bit about, in the coming year, what we see as issues that will spark that polarization, and how you think maybe as a community, New Hampshireites can push through that polarization on things that are highly controversial.
I just got, I brought up the death penalty vote earlier. I'm like, you teed this up for me, because as I said, it's an example where it was like 30 legislators changed their mind. That's a very large margin. That's like 10%. And I've heard from a lot of different people saying, oh, it was because of this or it was because of that. There was procedural things going on. They changed their mind. They change their mind. And I will say that the death penalty is not a purely Republican-Democrat issue. So actually, when we're talking about polarization and partisanship, I actually would put that in the category of an issue, even though it is incredibly personal and passionate for people, and I think gets to very fundamental questions about ethics in our society and how we want our government to run. I do think that it is an issue worth engaging on. But you kind of broadened it out. So I will also include, I think housing continues to be an incredibly cross-partisan issue in a lot of different ways. And I also see a lot of interesting opportunities related to energy, actually. And I know that Senator David Waters in particular, who is on the Seacoast, often seems to be able to find these creative sort of areas in energy where it's Republicans and Democrats are both like, oh, this is interesting. Like, let's work on this, whether it's portable solar, for example. That was one thing I was learning about this week. So I guess, yeah, I would throw a death penalty. I'm going to go ahead and say it. I actually feel that can be cross-partisan, but then housing and energy, I feel like. And I will say, we've talked a lot about school funding. Sometimes I wonder, and Steve and Michelle, you might totally disagree with me. We only have 2 minutes left. I'm sorry, everyone. I keep talking. Sometimes I wonder if that is just hyper-partisan, like polarization and separation, or if that's also partly people being overwhelmed at such a complex and intractable problem.
I do think the complexity gets in our way. I also think different things are compelling to different people. So if you think about the death penalty, some people, it's because that person deserves to die. For some people, it's because it's more expensive to administer the death penalty. For other people, it's sort of like there's lots of reasons. So I think being able to dig into the nuances, it's kind of to go back to, again, education funding, but even just that piece around special education, it takes digging in. Like, otherwise you're just not gonna be able to absorb the opportunities that are in the problem.
And
Indeed.
to end on a hopeful note, I think there is appetite for that digging in, but we need to create the spaces for that to happen. Yeah. And that's hard, and it takes energy to do that, and other types of resources like the money to do that and the time to do that. And how do we build those opportunities? Because people do want to engage. I am committed, and I've seen that around the state. How do we give them the chance to do it?
Well, thank you, panelists, Anna, Steve, Michelle. This has been a wonderful way to start the day and a wonderful way to start the year and our first Carsey Policy Hour of the year. And thank you all, audience participants, for your comments and your questions. So much good stuff in the chat. I've learned a lot this morning, and I am looking forward to seeing what 2026 brings for the state of New Hampshire. So fingers crossed, we can work through polarization, and join us in February, on February 14th, for the Carsey Policy Hour, which will be on food insecurity. We're going to be joined by the folks from the New Hampshire Food Alliance in February. So that should also be a terrific conversation on a really timely issue. So thank you all again for joining, and happy Wednesday.